I arrived in Vietnam in June of '68. So I had been in the Army 2 years, 1 year going through flight training, and then just another year at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio.
Does anything stand out in your mind? What's the first thing you remember about after arriving?
Heat, and we went to a barracks and for them to determine where you were going to go. And we went in a bus and it had screen on it so somebody couldn't throw a grenade in there. That's kind of what I remembered. I ended up being based at Lane Army Airfield. They had a runway, but it was mostly helicopters. They had gunship platoons and Medevac and Chinook at that place. So when I landed at that place, I was going to be in the 498 medical company. And I think they only have 2 or 3 medical companies in Vietnam, but they had several, maybe 10 or 11 detachments, because they wanted to be able to get people to a hospital in 30 minutes if they could. When I first got there, I met the commanding officer and this other guy that I didn't know, and he was a platoon leader, and the main man was a company commander. And the guy said, well, where should we send him? Because the 498 had a lot of outlying places where you went to, landing that you'd spend the night, spend the week, spend something that things were going on, so you'd be closer to the stuff that was going on. And the guy, not the commander, but the other guy, he said, do you play softball? I said, oh yeah, I play softball. So he told the commander, well, hey, let's keep him here because we got a softball tournament coming up. From there, we would go out to different field places. This place was near Lane Army Airfield, had a Korean infantry battalion. I think it's a battalion right near us. So we were charged with we covered their injuries too.
The ROK forces, Republic of Korea?
Yes. About, I'm thinking 2 or 3 days after I got there, they had a funeral for one of the crew chiefs that got killed. I already knew flying Medevac what I was getting into. It wasn't like, I had in the 2 years before I came, I ran across people who had been to Vietnam, pilots who had been to Vietnam, and because I stayed 2 years in San Antonio. I never got wounded. We maybe had to do one helicopter. I may have, we couldn't, it got shot up, but I never got wounded. And no one that I flew with, the real people, which was the crew chief and the medic, they were we were just pilots. They were doing the real stuff. By that, I mean, they took care of the wounded, and I'm sure it wasn't like we had a gun ship. We had one patient protector with a rifle or whatever he wanted to use. Usually it was a rifle. But the things I remember are kind of, I don't know if I've just put the bad stuff out of my mind and just thought about the crazy stuff. I mean, maybe even silly. I had just gotten there, and I probably was in my maybe second month of being there. And so I was flying. We have an aircraft commander, and then you have a pilot. Well, usually you don't become an aircraft commander till 2 or 3 months. So I was a pilot, and we went into this to pick up some wounded guys at a Vietnam compound, which it's usually all Vietnam soldiers and maybe a couple of Army sergeants or something, that really run them. So they had a little helicopter place that they let you land. And so we're talking to them on the radio, and they said, well, land it's there, and we'll bring the patient out. So they get the patient almost on the helicopter, and I look out my window, which was to the right, and I see this big hole, and I'm thinking, that's a mortar hole. So I told the guy, aircraft commander, I said, there's a mortar hole out here. We better go. We no more got probably 20 feet in the air, and the mortar, another one had exploded and probably had 22 holes in the tail from the shrapnel from the mortar. If I had not looked over there and seen that, they would have had us, because they had us, they had it locked in. But what I never did understand was why they directed us to that when they, that close to the mortar deal, where, I mean, if we went on the other side, the mortar they didn't have it zeroed in on that side. They had it right there. And
right there. Was it Vietnamese who brought you into that place, to that spot?
Well, it was Vietnamese that we were picking up, and it was a Vietnamese compound, but an American was there because we had to have somebody to translate.
The reason I asked that is because there are plenty of stories of guys wearing South Vietnamese uniforms who were also working for the other side.
Yeah. This wasn't that.
It wasn't that.
No, this wasn't that. No.
Oh.
It was just maybe that mortar hole had been there for a week, a day, or 2 months. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do know they had us zeroed in. Had we not just been lucky enough to look, and aircraft commander went up quick, they'd have had the whole, we'd have been dead. Well, anytime you went on a Korean mission, if somebody's wounded, then it's pretty hot. It's if they have fever or they're sick or something, that's a different deal. But if they're wounded, somebody shot them.
Right. Yeah.
Unless they had an accident or something.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and usually if it's an American that we're going to pick up, you can talk English and you can say, hey, which direction is fire coming from? So I don't want to go right over them. I want to be as far as I can from them. So with the Koreans, though, they don't have any. We're lucky to have. I think after I was there about 5 months, we got a American that was a Korean. His mother was Korean, and he could speak Korean. When he came, it was much better as far as the Koreans go, because he could tell from what they were saying whether it was going to be. When he started getting scared, we knew that something was, it wasn't just a little deal, just an easy little deal. So the Korean stuff to me was tough from that standpoint.
Because of the language troubles?
Yes. We could tell them to pop smoke or something, and they knew that, but we couldn't get any other information from them. So you never knew what you were getting into.
Now, of course, you're professional, you're doing your job, you're committed to your job. But I'm wondering if, let's say you're going on a mission and the word is we have American wounded. That's mission 1. Mission 2 is we're going to get Korean wounded. Of course, you're a professional, you're going to do your job and you're going to do it well. But was there did you feel a little more motivated when it came to getting the American guy? I was devoted to Americans, of course. If it would have been Americans and Koreans, I would, that. But I really didn't. We really didn't do anything different as far as picking up a Korean or picking up an American. When we picked up, sometimes we didn't know who they were, who they were. We picked up Vietnamese, Viet Cong. You did? Yeah. The Koreans would maybe go into a village. They would go into a village and see the Viet Cong had been there. And when they killed the Viet Cong, maybe the entrance to that village, they would hang his body. Yeah. So that the villagers would say, if we're going to do this, they'll kill us dead. They won't give us any, they don't take any enemy.
anything. One time we went to the Korean camp and for something, and we're driving in a Jeep, and we look over and they've got a formation of Korean soldiers, and then the lieutenant or whoever was kind of inspecting them.
Yeah.
And we looked over and he took his 45 and hit one of them right in the face.
Jeez.
And we thought, you know, they have no tolerance. Well, if there was a Viet Cong wounded that they thought they could get information out of or something, or if he was wounded, if we didn't have, we would not have carried a Viet Cong or over an American.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that'd be out of the question. But if we're there, usually dust off, you're supposed to only pick up wounded. You're not supposed to carry somebody that wants to go from this place to this place. We might take the guy, the Americans wanted, get him well, so maybe we can get some information from him, I suppose.
Your helos had Red Crosses on them, is that right?
Yeah.
But the VC didn't.
Oh, that was a target.
That's what I was going to.
Target. That was no. They shoot you down faster than, or just as fast as they would any helicopter.
It's kind of remarkable, you know, when you look at this war. We've got helicopters that have come over from the States. We've got these highly trained pilots. We've got jets, you know, we can call in fire missions from the Navy. You know, this incredible power has moved thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean. And then we talk about the Viet Cong, these guys running around and, you know, not to sound demeaning, but just to describe it, they're wearing sandals and pajamas and have pretty basic weapons.
They're wearing sandals made out of tires.
Yeah. As you think about them now as an enemy, what are your thoughts about the Viet Cong sort of as a, you know, military adversary to military adversary?
They really had no boundaries. They were worse than the Koreans.
Yeah.
As far as civilians, they didn't care. They were ruthless. But as far as you know, they didn't have the machinery we had. They didn't have, I don't want to say anything good about them just because, you know, I don't. But, you know, they were tough.
It sounds like you had some interaction with South Vietnamese forces as well.
Oh, yes. We had South Vietnamese forces, Koreans, Australians. Oh. I think Australians one time, I think they had, I just had one Australian pickup. It was just a guy wounded, but with an Australian thing. I think they had about 42 men at this compound, and one of them got wounded and we picked it up. It wasn't any different than picking up an American deal.
Yeah. So
he wasn't, sometimes these guys, we didn't just pick up the bad wounded, we picked up all wounded. We picked up a lot of people that had FUOs. That's fever unknown origin.
Oh, okay.
We didn't too much like those because they'd come at night, even though I like to fly at night.
Yeah.
And other than the mountains. And they would, you just didn't know what you were going to get. You didn't know if you were going to get a guy who intentionally did something to get his fever or whatever he might do to get to go. And we picked him up, and, you know, because we didn't know. It could be that the guy really had a bad fever.
Yeah.
They might get in the back, and the crew chief would say, "Hey, Captain Bailey, we got an idiot here," you know, because we in contact with our two guys in the back. I cannot be more thankful for the crew chief, and I mean, they were the ones that did everything. We were the taxi cab drivers, and they were the people who got these guys stabilized so we could get them to the hospital.
So on a mission, then you go out, you've got the pilot, you've got the commander, and then in the back you've got the crew chief and you've got the medic.
Right.
in the back there. And the crew chief, he's doing mechanical stuff, but also if he needs to if he needs to do some shooting, he'll do that as well, right?
Yeah.
And you have
to protect protect the guy we're picking up. We were in a place that was over close to Laos, and we had this crew chief with us, and he was almost probably had a month to go, or maybe 2 months to go before he went home. And we went out on a mission, but it was kind of rough. And he shot a hole in the bottom of our helicopter. He just got nervous and frantic. And so, of course, when we got back, we chewed him out. And the next day, we go out and he does the same thing.
Wow.
It was just, I felt sorry for him because he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
But that'll always remember because first of all, you're so busy, you don't get to shoot at anything much. And when he shot in the holes in the floor, he just, I thought, I hope he doesn't shoot us in the back. But he was a good guy and a good, good. Anyway,
what happened?
Just a silly story.
Did he get relieved of duty then?
No, we just told him, I think we told him that he was not to take the rifle.
Did you ever get a call for, some kid out in the field who just cracked up and that they just needed to get this guy out because, did any of those cases ever come up of some guy who just couldn't take it anymore and just needed to get out?
I might have picked up one or two of those guys because I remember when we picked them up, they would have all their gear. They wouldn't just be them, they'd have their gear so they could, because they weren't going to be going back out until they got straight. But as a rule, those would be the last things that we'd go for. If we were busy and something was going on, we'd do that rather than we'd do this guy later.
What was your perception of our South Vietnamese allies over there?
They were undependable. Would that be a good word? Yeah. You never knew when they had a wounded guy, you never really knew if he was really wounded or what. They were kind of just, I shouldn't say that because there were a lot of good ones. Yeah. But of the three, they were on the lower totem. Yeah. The three, them, the Koreans, and the Americans. Yeah. They were, their leadership was not good. Usually their officers had some kind of somebody fixed him up to be this that he really shouldn't have been because he couldn't even shoot or he couldn't even command people with nothing. But they didn't seem to have as much at stake as the Viet Cong did.
Do you think that's because maybe one of the reasons is they thought, hey, the Americans are here and the Americans will do it?
Oh, definitely. The people, mostly enlisted men, mostly draftees that had to go to the Vietnam War, when they got home and they were treated like stupid people because they went and they didn't protest and they didn't do all the other things. I can't hardly, it almost makes me want to cry. Now we've come around as a country, but back then, when you came on, the people tell you got spit on, you got this, you got that. I didn't have to face any of that because I was from a little town and, it just galls me to see how they were treated because so many of them, had burdens to carry and they just treated them they didn't treat them like heroes. They didn't treat them like somebody. And, when you're drafted, you got to go. Or, you leave the country like Clinton or somebody else did. You leave the country, yeah, that's great. But when you can't, and you don't have the wherewithal to do that or even the want to do it, and you come back and you're treated that way, it's just, it makes me want to cry. Because so many of these guys felt like they were nothing, and they, went to drugs, alcohol, just run their life when they were actually heroes.